Hi, Elise.
Hi,
Good.
dear.
How are you, Risa?
I'm good. How are you both doing?
Really
Uh,
well.
Beautiful,
Good,
beautiful.
good. Well, we are on our fifth episode of Curated Conversations, and we're continuing with this theme of looking at local Bermudian artists, ones that are in our collection. So this week we decided to dedicate this discussion to Catharine and Ethel Tucker. So I will kick off with just, share a little bit more about these two women, who they were, when did they live in Bermuda, and yeah, just give us a little bit of background to who they were as individuals.
Right. Well, who they were as individuals is actually a very long episodic answer. They had a very vibrant and lively life, and they came from a family of 11 siblings, two of whom died very early on. So there were nine that lived a full life. Kate and Ethel were dedicated, violently opposed to men in their life. They were sworn spinsters, and they were strong feminists. They opened up two shops, which I think is very interesting. One called the Green Shop and the other called the Green Door. The Green Shop was as the name would suggest, a retail outlet. The Green Door was down in Bars Harbor, which was a little a tea shop. They were much smarter than their male counterparts. And when they were given a notice that they could not put up a Tucker's tea sign for advertising, what they cleverly did was they put out a teapot on a flag outside their little cafe to get away from what the court had ruled was not on. When they had their little shops going, they were selling a lot of their watercolors, because the whole, excuse me, I'm back, I need to back up a little bit. The whole Tucker family for generations has had an artistic streak in it. And these two were no exception. And they immediately jumped on the bandwagon. And I'm often fond of saying that in 1885, when we opened up the doors of tourism, we opened up the doors to a brand new economy. And the Tucker sisters seized on that economy right away. They sold their watercolors, I'm guessing, for probably 2 to 3 shillings to a visitor who would take it back to the United States and or Canada. And so as a result, today, we see them on eBay and other auction outlets across the United States. They were prolific. Every work was an original. Yes, they did sell some postcards, but they sold their artwork. And so they painted, let's say, a prospect of Hamilton. And they would have painted it 20 or 30 times. They never got tired of it. Each one was slightly different than the other, but the views were the same. And I think of the two classics that I have are looking up at Stewart Hall in St. George's, where there's cropped Stewart Hall and a fence slightly differently on the left-hand side. And it makes a fascinating kind of a comparison. They're an interesting couple. In fact, I think it was Catharine Tucker who was the first female on the Corporation of Hamilton, or Kate.
Great, thank you. Elise, do you have anything to add?
I think he said it. He said I don't know what else to say. We're the Tucker sisters.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did a show behind the Green Door. If anybody wants to go to Masterworks, it's still, part of it is still hanging, and we have the original flag. And to go back on the story of the flag, it was in 1934. So it was a time that women, as Tom said, weren't usually running their own businesses. And as the story goes, the law worked for some people and didn't work for others. It didn't work for some women. It didn't work for Black Bermudians. So the Catharine Tucker's big speech with this whole thing about taking the flag down was that the Furnace flag was flying with a big F on it. The Princess flag was flying with a big P on it, and on and on and on. And she wasn't allowed to put her teapot on the flag. So what she did was she waited until she was given a month to take it down. The first magistrate was a Smith. I can't remember which one he was, but the second one was his brother, because they didn't want to touch the Tucker systems with a 10-foot pole. So poor Donald Smith was left as the magistrate to deal with the situation. Anyway, he gave them a month to take it down, and of course they waited the full month. And on the night of the last day, they had made a new flag with a T on it, which was allowed in because that was their ensign or their house flag. So they just, the police and the magistrates just threw their hands up and said, we just can't deal with it. So that kind of gives you an idea of what Bermuda was like in the 30s when they flourished, and how feisty they were to fight against it. As Tom also said, they were from a very, very artistic family stretching back centuries. And one of Catherine's memories is her mother used to make Christmas cards and wallpaper and little notelets while the children were all 8 or 9 of them were in baby carriages or in their high chairs. And this is what she'd do. The family were fairly wealthy, but struggling with 8 children made it necessary for Lenore, the mother, to take this kind of mantle on. And I think that was where the girls got their great inspiration. And finally got to go to art school. They saved money. They worked very hard. They went to art school in New York, and then they went to London and worked for interior decorators. And finally, a company took on their cards, and the rest is history. We still have them. You still see their work around. Their quaint, little mementos of the island. But it was more than just little watercolors. They moved those into making matchbook covers, bridge covers, postcards, notelets. They did beautiful scarves, silk scarves. They just did all manner of things, and it was quite remarkable at the time.
Great. Yeah, so they sound like a very artistic duo. So, the way that they looked at every kind of avenue to be creative is
Right.
quite interesting. Yeah.
It wasn't just artistic, though. It was incredibly entrepreneurial against a backdrop of an all-male dominated social scene, political scene, economic scene. And the fact that they could fight through it is remarkable. And I believe that they had another outlet in the United States that they would go to in the summertime.
They actually do.
Just confined here in Bermuda. So, we have to sort of, that amount of energy. And you think in those days that they were going back and forth by cranky old ships and not, stepping on a plane and 2 hours later you're in a new environment. It would have taken them weeks to probably get to their other locations. So the fact that they have all this work around on top of their businesses is really quite staggering. And I might point out, by the way, the little green door, the cafe, was Mark Twain's hangout. And we do have a photograph of Big Mark hanging out there. Interestingly enough, the green door building was a wooden, we would call it a shack today. It was collapsed and moved out to Long Island, where it ultimately met its demise only about 20 years ago. Did it finally sort of just fall apart. I'm sad that to say that I did not rescue the doors that were on that building, because the doors, and this is another very interesting piece of history, were shipped from Crimea to Bermuda. But that's a whole other chapter. We won't even get into that. But anyway, so that was the end of the green door.
Right. So I'm curious about the pieces from the Tucker sisters in our collection at Masterworks. Which pieces really stand out from, just looking at them in comparison to other artworks that we have? Which ones really feel like they resonate the most with you from both Ethel and Kate?
Well, we have so many. We really have a treasure trove. We were very lucky that a descendant of the Tuckers, in fact, 2 descendants of the Tuckers, one early on gave us Tom and I went to the house, and they just said, opened a cedar chest and just said, take whichever watercolors you want. I can't even remember how many we picked up. It was just wonderful. And since then, Wendy Tucker and Edna Tucker have given us their full archive of not only their artwork, but their stitchery, their bags, just a treasure trove. So it's hard for me to say which one, because I think of their work as a body of work, not as one particular image. I would agree with Tom. I think the one with the little green door, the tea shop, is that really resonates because people remember it and is associated with Mark Twain. But there are so many other ones. They did seascapes, they did architecture, they did the cathedral, they did, from one end of the island to the other. So, their work is really to me, it's looked at as a body of work, not, there's no masterpiece that I can think of. Maybe Tom can.
Yeah, well, one of the ones that I would love to weigh in on, because it's, it just is in keeping with the glorious, serendipitous elements and events that have happened throughout the 33 years of the collecting. When we went up there, we discovered that there was one watercolor with the gates of Camden. And that's important because, as you are well aware, Camden is where the museum is. It's on the Botanical Gardens. Camden was part of the whole Tucker property there. So we have that as a symbol, really, of our becoming a museum, because we were given these before we actually were a museum, as almost like an indicator that this good omen was going to come our way and be part of the collection. So I love it for that reason. Unfortunately, in this day and age of instant emails and other communications, postcards have gone the way of the wooden wagon wheel. If we were to make a postcard of it, it would mean you'd have to force somebody to lick a stamp and write a postcard these days. It's just a no-go. It's just a non-starter, sadly.
Yeah. And again, I'd love to give a big shout out to Edna Tucker and Wendy Tucker, who have been just amazingly supportive. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Tina Hutchings, who helped catalog and do the exhibitions with me. She was just she was just great. She was a great source of inspiration. Her artistic talents were astounding, and being a Bermudian and being a female Bermudian artist, she had a good understanding of just exactly where they. Terribly appreciative of that, and the fact that they're still selling them today. I mean, you can still buy postcards and notelets, and the Tucker sisters' legacy does carry on.
Great.
You can even see your curator's language is changing when you do shout outs. I don't think Edna Tucker would know what a shout out is, but anyway, that's it.
Wait, what?
Well, that's a great place to look at. Kind of wrapping up this conversation is what I mean. We talked about their creative, entrepreneurial energy. Their focus on really looking at a lot of different artistic ways to have an impact in our local community and even abroad. What other kind of lasting impressions would you like to leave our viewers with of the Tucker sisters?
If you put their body of work together, and I mean the entire, how many different images they made, one by one, and lined them up, you would have a clear insight of Bermuda's environment circa 1900 to 1940. Let's put a limitation on that. You would not have a clear insight into sort of the people of the island, but certainly the landscapes, the flora, fauna, seascapes. You would get a real way of life before the automobile. We must keep in mind that the automobile is what changed the whole presence and essence of this island, and reflected light because tarmac came to cover up the coral stone roads. And so the whole quality of light here changed for artists dramatically who were painting the scapes of the island. So it's a show that we should probably do, because we have alone, I would think, 100 different images of the island. Probably, if we were to go get the whole full archive from the Tucker family, if they were willing to let us have the remainder, you'd find that there would be at least 250 different images stretching from Somerset to St. George's. They moved around the entire island.
Elise, any final words?
No, I just think that there's more and more and more we can learn about the entire Tucker family and their artistic legacy and what they left for Bermuda, and how they were one of those Bermudian families that really did appreciate art stretching back centuries, which is quite unusual because these Bermudians, it just wasn't number one on their list, but for some reason the Tuckers seemed to have this flair that was passed down generation to generation.
Great. Yeah, and I think this is one of the reasons why studying art is so compelling, right? It's because it uncovers stories around people, the way they lived, and I think the Tucker sisters, will be exploring, their legacy on the island for years to come. So thank you, Tom and Elise. And before we wrap up, I just want to give a shout out, since we're using that, to the museum, which will be opening its doors on June 29th. So we are really excited to have people come back into our space. We have the Follow the Sun exhibition up, and we would love to welcome people back to the museum over the summer.
That's right. As soon as I get back on that property, I will be shouting out. From one end of the island to the other. How happy I will be to see this place open up.
Yeah, no, me too. Me too. All right. Well, thank you, Tom and Elise.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.